Joan and I are on the road, at least I am, a couple hundred days a year. And we get to do things like this all the time. We get to come to cities we've never been to before, stay in historic hotels, and have wonderful hosts and hostesses who are willing to take their time and show us what they like about their area. We're not tourists wherever we go. We have people like this who are willing to open their homes and take us around to the places that they love and share that with us. That's such a gift. I owe it basically to three people in my life. The first one is my mother, who grew up in that little milk-sick cove part of western North Carolina. Now, if you got in a helicopter and you flew from where my mother grew up in that little mountain cove to Asheville, North Carolina, which got the same vaudeville troops as Chicago, the playground of the rich is what it was called. Beautiful architecture if you've never been. I think it's a pretty city in the South. If you got in a helicopter and flew from where my mother to the Pack Square, the middle of Asheville, it's probably 12 miles. My mother was 8 years old the first time she ever saw it, because her brother Roy had worked at a sawmill and got enough money to buy a T-model Ford. Now, he had been to town plenty of times, but he took Mama and Elvita, her older sister. Elvita's like Joan and her sister. Elvita's 18 months older than my mama, Aretha. Well, he decided one Saturday he'd take the girls to town, and they dressed up in their Sunday clothes. And he drove them over to Pack Square and stopped in the middle of Pack Square and turned to them and said, "All right, girls, we're in town. What do you want to do?" And my Aunt Elvita said, "I want to go to the picture show," because she'd been buying those movie magazines. She wanted to see Clark Gable, you know. And he turned to Mom and he said, "All right, we'll go to the picture show." He said, "Aretha, what do you want to do?" She said, "I want to go to the library." I think before it was over, my mother had read every book in the Asheville Library 3 times. My mother's the one who instilled in me my love for story and song. The way she started me in the music world was she had listened to those big bands, you know, that was her music. And if I'd come in from school at 4 o'clock and the early show was on, which showed those old movies that she grew up on, if she was sitting on the settee and had a fresh bowl of popcorn and was patting that third cushion, that meant that one of her big bands was on. Come here on to show you what music is. Well, she taught me a whole lot about life from those movies. One of them was, I'll never forget, the Glenn Miller Orchestra was on. She said, "Oh, you're going to love this one. The number 1, you're going to get to experience Sing, Sing, Sing." And now, I didn't know what Sing, Sing, Sing was, but I watched enough of her crime movies to know that Sing, Sing was up the river from New York somewhere, and I figured Sing, Sing, Sing must be in Toronto or something, you know. She said, there's a guy in here by the name of Gene Krupa. I thought it sounded like a hereditary lung disorder. I didn't know who Gene Krupa was. She said, "But there's another man that I want you to tell me what's unusual about him." Well, there was the Glenn Miller Orchestra over there in a nightclub and practice and rehearsal in the afternoon. She said, "Now watch this." She said, "You're going to see an instrument, you're going to think it's a xylophone, but it's not a xylophone, it's a vibraphone. Tell me what's unusual about when you see this." Well, they started the song, and then the camera panned over, and there was the great African-American Lionel Hampton playing the vibes. She said, "What do you think about that?" I said, "There's a Negro in a white band. I've never seen that before." She said, "Yep." She said, "That is the Jackie Robinson of music right there. He was the first man to break the color barrier." She said, "And it took a Jewish man from the ghettos of Chicago to have the nerve to do that." I thought, wow, it's cool. And about that time she said, "Oh, here it comes, sing, sing, sing." And I heard, and I looked, and there was Gene Krupa in a white dinner jacket, chewing gum and playing the first drum solo I guess ever recorded. As soon as I saw it, I went, "That's me. That's what I'm going to do." Now, what 10-year-old boy don't want to chew gum and beat on stuff, right? That's me. I'm going to become a jazz drummer. My mother looked at me and said, "What?" I said, "I'm going to become a jazz drummer. I need a snare drum right away." Now, folks, I'll guarantee you that the Southern Appalachian Mountains were a hotbed of jazz music in 1958. Finally, my parents relented and bought me a snare drum for Christmas when I was 11 or 12, I guess. I would come home from work, get that little Philco record player out from under the bottom of the TV there, you know, put my mother's treasured big band records on there and just torture them on the drum. Ah! And my mother would stand in the kitchen and silently weep into a dish towel. I wanted him to become a musician, and he's become a drummer, you know. So on my 14th birthday, I remember I said, I've got to have a hi-hat, Mom. I've got to have a hi-hat. She said, well, son, I've noticed that most of the people in the jazz orchestras don't wear hats on stage. I said, no, a hi-hat is two cymbals on a stand, and they've got a rod that goes down, and there's a pedal, and when you stomp that pedal, them cymbals crash together. And she went, Well, when I came in to get my hi-hat for my 14th birthday, we always got our birthday presents at the supper table. There was no hi-hat. What there was on my plate was a present about that square and about that thick. And I went, what's this? Mom said, open it. I just grabbed the paper and ripped it, you know, how 14-year-old snotty boys can be. I just did like that. And a little strip of paper came across it like that. And I looked and I saw 3 words that would change my life forever. I didn't know it at the time. Those 3 words were the Kingston Trio. I said, is this a jazz group, Mom? She said, no, that's a different kind of music. She said, have you heard that song that they play on the radio, Hang Down Your Head, Tom Dooley? And I said, yeah. She said, these are the boys that recorded that. I said, I'm a jazz. She said, no, let's try it. Okay, so we went in the living room. She pulled that drawer out. She put that record on. She took the arm. She set it down on there. And with 3 minutes had passed, my life had changed forever. Now, some of you may be old enough to remember turntables. You've got one at your house. If your record started wearing out, you could put a quarter on the arm of the record player, and it would dig that needle down in there more, and you get more life out of your record than your needle, right? I got that record on a Friday. By Sunday evening, I had $9.86. I had worn it out. Now, Monday morning, I said, Mom, are you going into town by any chance today? And she said, well, yes, I have to do some grocery shopping. Why? I said, could I ride to town with you? She said, well, sure. She didn't know it, but I put the snare drum in the trunk of the car. We got downtown. I said, Mom, would you mind stopping here on Main Street? She said, well, yeah, why? I said, I got to run a little, I'll be right back. She said, sure. She pulled into a parking place. I got out, walked around the trunk, opened the trunk, got the snare drum out, walked into Charlie's pawn shop, walked out 10 minutes later with a K guitar. Put the guitar in the car, leaned it up against the back of the front seat, got in beside it. My mother looked at that K guitar, looked at me, and kissed me on the mouth. So then I was working on a little dairy farm outside town. Every nickel I made went to the furniture store in town where they had the record selection. If it said Vanguard or Folkways, it came home with me. I would cut the cellophane off of it, rip it out of there, put it on that turntable, put it down, sit down in front of it with that K guitar and try to figure out how Doc Watson was playing Black Mountain Rag. How does the Greenbrier Boys doing that? How's Buffy St. Marie doing that? I tried to figure all that stuff out. My mother loved it. School was getting ready to start. I was in there working on my guitar. She came in, she said, excuse me. I said, what is it, Mom? She said, can you turn that off for a second? I said, sure. I lifted the arm up. She said, I got an idea. I said, what is it? She said, from now on, every album that you bring into the house, before you can cut the cellophane off of it, you have to read a book. I said, why in the world would I want to read a book? She said, I would almost bet you that Buffy St. Marie and Tom Paxton read books. And you know, I thought, I don't know. She said, I got something for you. And she handed me a copy of The Old Man and the Sea. She said, read that. Tell me what you think about it. My life changed forever. Stories and songs. My mom. The second person was a man by the name of John Stokely. Now, I don't know if the name Stokely means anything in this part of the world, but in Newport, Tennessee, Stokely's a big name because they own Stokely Van Camp Beans. Stokely Van Camp Beans, a big deal in the South. John Stokely was an heir to that Stokely Van Camp Bean fortune. Newport's 20 miles from where I grew up. When John Stokely graduated from Cocke County High School in the early 1950s, they sent him to the University of Tennessee at Knoxville to study accounting. He was going to work in the family business. I get to say this all the time. John Stokely was going to become a bean counter. But he got down there to the University of Tennessee and ironically had to take some American literature. And ironically, his teacher walked up to him one day and said, "Have you ever read any Ernest Hemingway?" And he said, "I don't think I have." And he handed him a copy of The Old Man and the Sea. And John Stokely's life changed. John decided, maybe I don't need to count beans. Maybe I could do more for America by teaching American literature to high school students. So John Stokely graduated as a teacher and got a job teaching American literature at Morristown High School, where Michael Reno Harrell was a student. Now, by this time, I'm in John Stokely's class. I'm a junior, and I've played that guitar. I've carried it on my back. I'm the Bob Dylan of my high school, right? And I had me about 3 little girls, freshmen, that thought I was really cool because I carried that guitar with me. Well, like I say, I've been listening to Tom Paxton and Phil Oakes and Ian Tyson and Buffy St. Marie, all those people who are now writing folk songs. And I thought, I bet I could write a folk song. So I wrote a song, and I managed to rhyme "Blue Eyes in Your Thighs." Sitting on the front steps of the high school, I was playing "Blue Eyes in Your Thighs" to my little fan club, and I got through, and behind me I heard, and I turned around on the steps and looked, and I was looking right into the toes of 2 brown size 16 wingtip shoes. And right past the Argyle socks and up at the end of that Brooks Brothers suit, 6 feet and 4 inches above that stood John Stokely. And he looked down at me and he said, "Michael, what in the world was that?" I said, "It's a folk song and I wrote it." He said, "Well, it had some elements of the song in it." He said, "Actually, I think you may have some talent for this." He said, "I'll tell you what I'll do." He said, "You're not doing that well in my class. All you want to do is play that guitar, right?" I said, "It's what I'm going to do the rest of my life, as far as I can tell." He said, "Well, tell you what I'll do." He said, "If you will write me an original song every week and bring it to my classroom at Friday at 3:30 before I go home for the weekend and play it and sing it for me, if you'll do that every week, every 6 weeks that you do that, I will raise you 1 whole grade." When I graduated from high school, I graduated with a .01 more than it took to graduate. It was because John Stokely raised me 1 point. John Stokely, the man who said, "Maybe you got a talent for songwriting." The third person is that girl sitting right over there. Now, I had played in every seafood bar in South Carolina. I'd played in every bar up and down the East Coast from Key West to Michigan or to Maryland. And every time I'd try to play one of my songs in those bars, they'd say, "Hey, play something we like. Play some Jimmy Buffett." So I finally decided if anybody is going to hear my songs, it's not going to be me singing them. I've got to get somebody that's famous to sing my songs. So now if you're going to become a professional songwriter, your choices are you're going to move to Los Angeles, California, New York City, or Nashville, Tennessee. With this accent, guess where I went? Well, I went down there and I had some friends that were doing pretty well in the songwriting world, and I had written enough songs that they said, "You ought to listen to this guy." And finally I worked my way around and I got a deal with a songwriting publishing house down there called New Clarion Music. They published my very first song. And then I got on with a better house called Cedarwood Publishing. And then I got on with a little publishing company that was run by a wonderful man by the name of Bob Doyle. Bob Doyle, they called him Major Bob because he was also a navigator on a C-130 in the Tennessee Air National Guard, Major Bob. He was a wonderful guy, was a big help to me, but he had 2 artists that he represented. One was the great Buddy Munlock. Some of you may have heard of Buddy. If you hadn't, Mundlock, go look up Buddy Munlock. He's great. The other artist he had was from Oklahoma, from a little town called Stillwater, a little old boy by the name of Garth Brooks. Bob had pretty good ideas about who had what. Had a little publishing company, and anything I wrote that he thought might work, he'd pitch it to Polygram or whatever. I got my first real recording from that. It turned out to be a platinum record. Thank you, Bob Dole. But I wasn't doing great. I wasn't setting the woods on fire. I was writing a lot of songs, and I'd bring them to Bob, and he'd go, "It's a great song, Michael." He said, "But it's not. I don't think it's what they're looking for here." And finally, I had an epiphany. I discovered that I wasn't cut out to write country music songs. That occurred one Friday when Bob Dole called me in his office and said, "Michael, you're not cut out to write country music." He said, "Your songs are great." He said, "They're getting better all the time." He said, "You need to find an audience for your song because it's not top 40 country." I said, "Bob, I've tried it. There ain't no audience for my songs. Thank you very much." I put my guitar in the truck and I drove to Charlotte, North Carolina, put my guitar under the bed of the apartment I rented, and went to work in the graphics house. She was working in my department. We started talking. We started getting together after work on Wednesdays or Thursdays or whatever, having a drink, having dinner, talking about our lives. I never said anything to her about my former life as a try to be musician. Well, some friends of ours, it turns out the old boy that played bass with us in this little group I put together to take to Winfield this year, Tom Coon, he was in a band called the Rank Outsiders, and they were playing Americana music, and we were trying to write their own music. Well, they knew that I'd been a staff writer in Nashville, and they said, "Come and sit in with us and listen to our songs. Tell us what you think." I said, "Just look at the audience. They'll tell you if your songs are any good or not." Just like I told Catherine, I said, "If they're doing this, they're good. If they're doing this, they're not." They said, "Well, we want you to come sit in with us and watch the audience and tell us what you think about our performance and stuff." And I said, "Well, all right." I said, I don't play the guitar anymore, but I'll bring my mandolin and just sort of chop rhythm." I said, "That'll do." So I met Joan after work for a beer, and we had a beer, and I said, "I gotta go." She said, "Really? Where are you going?" I said, "I'm sitting in with a band." She said, "What?" I said, "I'm sitting in with a band." She said, "You play music?" I said, "Well, for a long time I did." She said, "Well, I'm coming." I said, "Okay." So I got there, and there was Joan sitting at a little two-top table, and the band setting up, and we started first set, and I stood up there with them, back on the mandolin, and listened to them. They were good. We got ready to take a break, and Bill Noonan said, "Here, give me your mandolin." I handed it to him. He took off his guitar and said, "Play one of your songs for them." I said, "Nobody wants to hear my songs." He said, "We do," and they left the stage and left me standing there, so I sang one of my songs, and a few people politely clapped, and I looked at Joan, and she's going. I walked over and sat down next to her, and she said, "You didn't write that song." I said, "Yeah, I did." She said, "Do you have any more songs like that?" And I said, 9,000. She said, "You need to be singing your songs in front of people that will listen to your songs." I said, "Honey, there aren't any." She said, "I'll bet you there are." I said, "Well, I don't know who they are or where they are." She said, "I don't either." She said, "Why don't we find out together?" 22 years ago, she signed on as my booking agent and manager, and for the last several years, 200 days a year, we get to do this. I had my Rayovac flashlights. I had Huckleberry Finn. I was reading underneath the covers about the time my mama walked in, and I knew I was in for trouble. I knew I'd have to pay the price. And then she said, "Son, show me what you're reading." And when she left my room, she turned on my lights. Here's to the ones who show us how it's done, 'cause they don't see the world in black and white. Here's to the ones who aren't to let us run and let our imaginations take flight. this teacher back in high school. Junior English 8 a.m. One morning I was late for class because my guitar sounded so good in the gym. And I knew I was in for trouble. And then I found out I was wrong. 'Cause while everybody else was writing poems, my assignment was to write a song. Here's to the ones who show us how it's done, 'cause they don't see the world in black and white. Here's to the ones who aren't afraid to let us run and let our imaginations take flight. Here's to the ones who shine the lights. I make my living telling stories and singing songs like this one here. Oh, but I used to play in places where they tell me that ain't what we want to hear. And then I married me an angel, and because of her, my barroom days are through. And now I travel around the country, singing songs and telling tales to folks like you. Here's to the ones who show us how it's done, 'cause they don't see the world in black and white. Here's to the ones who aren't afraid